If you want to say anything in Italian, you need to know how to conjugate Italian verbs. Now, it might sound or even look overwhelming at first, but once you learn a few simple patterns, conjugating Italian verbs is facile, easy. Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm the Intrepid Guide, your guide to language learning for travel. Now, if you're new to my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click on the bell notification so you get an alert when I post more videos like this one. Today I'm going to be sharing with you how to conjugate Italian verbs da capo, meaning from the very beginning. Now I'm going to go back to basics because when it comes to language learning, assuming anything is a big mistake, and I don't want to assume that you know anything about conjugating verbs just yet. Now when I first started learning Italian, before I could even learn how to conjugate a verb, first I had to understand what it was. What is a verb? So let's talk about verbs. Now just looking at the word may conjure up negative feelings from boring grammar lessons at school, and you may have even gone your whole adult life and you still don't know what they are. Don't worry, I didn't know what they were either. That is, not until I studied Italian, my first foreign language. I'm going to break down this seemingly scary grammatical term and make it super easy for you to understand and remember what verbs are. Why? Well, because as you learn Italian, you will see similar looking words, but very often they can seem slightly different with slightly different endings and also have different meanings. Without a doubt, learning how to conjugate verbs in Italian is one of the most important and powerful steps in the learning process. So, cominciamo, let's get started. So, what are verbs? Well, a verb is a word that you can place to in front of. So in English we have to travel, which in Italian is viaggiare. There's also the verb to eat, which is mangiare in Italiano. Now these are examples of verbs in their full form, in which they're called the infinitive. So the infinitive form is a verb that hasn't been conjugated, so it's the unconjugated verb. But what is an unconjugated verb? Well, it's when the verb doesn't tell you who is doing the action. So every time we speak, you change the verb to reflect the subject of the verb, so who is doing it. And this process of changing verbs is called conjugating. For example, if you say she's eating a pizza, then she is the subject. She is the person conducting the action. She's the one who's eating the pizza. So therefore, in Italian, you couldn't just say mangiare una pizza, because on its own, this just means eating a pizza. Instead, you have to conjugate the verb mangiare to say lei mangia una pizza. She's eating a pizza. It's important to be able to recognize verbs in the infinitive form, as this is how they are organized in your common dictionary. So how do you conjugate Italian verbs? Well, let's take a look at how you conjugate Italian verbs in the present tense. Now, in grammatical terms, this is called the present indicative tense. Now, I know it's a little bit scary sounding, but try not to focus on that too much. It just means that it's used to express or indicate facts. Now, the indicative tense is the most commonly used mood in everyday conversation, and this is what we'll be focusing on in this video. Now, the present indicative, or as its name implies, is used to form statements and questions in the present tense. In other words, things that are happening now. Now, in English, the present tense can be expressed in three different ways. We have the simple present, which is I eat, for example, the present progressive, which is I am eating, so I'm currently doing it, and the emphatic present, which is I do eat. In Italian, you can express all three of these meanings just by saying mangio, I eat. Now that's right, you get 3 for the price of 1. In Italian, there is no amming, ising, or aring that you need to worry about. So ever notice when some native Italians speak English and they will say things like I go tomorrow or I go now instead of saying I'm going tomorrow or I'm going now? Now this is because they don't use the ing endings to describe what they are doing now in the present tense, or what they are going to do in the future. Now it sounds like broken English to our ears, but it's 100% correct in Italian. So try and remember this when you speak Italian. Next up we have subject pronouns. Now what are subject pronouns? Well, in order to conjugate Italian verbs, we must first familiarize ourselves with subject pronouns. Now subject pronouns in English are I, you singular, he, she, it, we, you plural, or you all, or y'all, and they. Now here they are in Italian. We have io, I, tu, you informal, lui, lei, he, she, noi for we, voi for you plural, and loro for they. In Italian, subject pronouns come before the conjugated verb, but their use differs from English. Subject pronouns in Italian are only used to add emphasis to the subject or for clarification. To add a similar emphasis in English, we simply stress the pronoun by increasing our voice slightly, perhaps. Now, as you will learn in the examples I'm about to share, the subject is already part of the conjugated verb and is represented by the final letters. Now, this is worth repeating. The subject, which is the thing or the person who is doing the action, is represented by the final letters of the verb in Italian. In Italian, we have verb families, and most of the time Italian verbs follow certain rules, and we call these regular verbs. Now, the ones that don't follow the rules are called irregular verbs, and we'll cover those a little bit later. All verbs in Italian belong to one of three families, which can be easily identified by their endings. So we have ERE endings, IRE endings, and ARE, so ere, ire, are. Now, these three endings represent the to part of the verb, as they are always found in the infinitive, so mangiare, to eat, to travel, viaggiare. Now, this is how you'll be able to identify the infinitive. Just look out for these final three-letter endings, and then you'll know that you have the infinitive. Now, the rules are the same for each family, so after you've learned the pattern for one verb, you'll know how to conjugate all the verbs in that particular family, as if by magic. The first type of conjugation is the are family, ARE, which is the largest and has the most regular verbs. For example, there's the verb parlare, to speak. The second type of conjugation is the ere family, which has its own set of rules. For example, the verb prendere, to take. The third type of conjugation is the ire family, which has two methods of conjugation. One example is capire, to understand. Next, we're going to learn how to use the stem to conjugate verbs. Now, if are, ere, and ire are called the infinitive ending, then what is left is called the stem. In other words, the first part of the verb. Now, by using the stem, so that first part, you can start to conjugate verbs. Now, to conjugate any irregular Italian verb in the present tense, all you need to do is follow three steps. First, keep the stem. Second, drop the infinitive ending. And third, replace the ending with the appropriate conjugation. So here's how to obtain the stem, and we'll look at the three different families. So we've got the ARE family, chiamare, which is to call. So we drop the ARE at the end and we keep the CHIAM. For chiudere, which is to close, we drop the ERE and we keep the CHIUD at the beginning. And for servire, the IRE family, which means to need, we drop the IRE and we keep the SERV at the beginning. And once you have found your stem, you can finally start to add the conjugated endings appropriate to that verb family. So verbs ending in ARE will have the endings o, I, a, iamo, ate, and anno. With these endings, you can now conjugate the verb parlare, which means to speak, and this is a verb that you'll use a lot. So, io parlo, tu parli, lui, lei parla, noi parliamo, voi parlate, loro parlano. Now, the endings for ERE verbs are very similar. We've got o, I, e, iamo, ete, and onno. Now, with these endings, you can now conjugate the verb vendere, to sell. So, io vendo, tu vendi, lui, lei vende, noi vendiamo, noi vendete, loro vendono. As I mentioned before, the endings of IRE verbs can be conjugated in two different ways. The endings of the first form follow a very similar pattern to what we've already seen. Now, these are o, I, e, iamo, ite, and onno. Now, with these endings, you can now conjugate the verb partire, which is to depart or to leave. So we have io parto, tu parti, lui, lei parte, noi partiamo, voi partite, loro partono. Now, the second form takes a different set of endings, and these are isco, isci, isce, iamo, ite, iscono. Now, with these endings, we can now conjugate the verb finire, which is to finish. So, io finisco, tu finisci, lui, lei finisce, noi finiamo, voi finite, loro finiscono. Now, with these two different ways of conjugating IRE verbs, how do you know which set of endings to use? Well, a good dictionary should give you a good indication if the verb goes like finire or partire. Other than that, as with everything else, you learn as you go along and you learn by context. As you learn Italian, take note of the endings of the verbs and spot the similarities between each verb family. Now, can you spot any other patterns? For example, I always ends in O, so parto, I depart, finisco, I finish. And then we have we, which always finishes in an iamo, so noi mangiamo, we eat, noi finiamo, we finish. Italian also irregular irregular verbs, which means the stem may change form once it's being conjugated, and this is called a stem changing verb. As with the verb bere, meaning to drink, whose stem changes to bev, B-E-V, when conjugated. Now, each conjugation has its own set of endings that replaces the ending of the infinitive. A few common irregular Italian verbs are conjugated as follows. So from the are verb family, we have andare. Andare is to go. Now we have io vado, tu vai, lui, lei va, noi andiamo, voi andate, and loro vanno. Then we have fare, which is to do or to make. So it's io faccio, tu fai, lui, lei fa, noi facciamo, voi fate, loro fanno. Then we have stare, which is to be or to stay and remain. We have io sto, tu stai, lui, lei sta, noi stiamo, voi state, loro stanno. Then we have the irregular verbs from the ERE family. Now, the two most important verbs from this family are the auxiliary verbs essere, which means to be, and avere, to have. So let's look at these two first. So avere means to have. So we have io ho, tu hai, lui, lei ha, noi abbiamo, voi avete, loro hanno. Then we have the verb essere, which means to be. So first we have io sono, tu sei, lui, lei è, noi siamo, voi siete, loro sono. Then we have bere, which we touched on earlier, which is to drink. So we have io bevo, tu bevi, lui, lei beve, noi beviamo, voi bevete, loro bevono. Then we have the verb sapere, which means to know. So we have io so, tu sai, lui, lei sa, noi sappiamo, voi sapete, loro sanno. Then we have the verb potere, which is to be able to or can. So io posso, tu puoi, lui, lei può, noi possiamo, voi potete, loro possono. Next up we have the IRE verb endings. Now the irregular verbs that fall into this group are dire, which is to say or to tell. So first we have io dico, tu dici, lui, lei dice, noi diciamo, voi dite, loro dicono. Then we have the verb venire, which means to come. So io vengo, tu vieni, lui, lei viene, noi veniamo, voi venite, loro vengono. So that's how you conjugate verbs in Italian. And once you know how to master this in the present tense, you'll be able to apply the same principles to the other tenses, including the past tense and the future tense. Now, my top tip for becoming more confident and quicker at conjugating verbs in Italian is with practice. Now, write out short sentences about people in your life and use a verb conjugation app like Conju that allows you to practice each verb family individually and in different tenses. Now, if you're serious about learning Italian, make sure you check out my free guide, 7 Common Mistakes in Italian and How to Avoid Them. Just click on the link in the description below and I'll send you your free guide. In the meantime, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel and turn on the notifications so you get an alert when I post more videos like this one. Until next time, thanks for watching and happy language learning. Ciao!